It's a pretty epic scene. Really great piece of the story. The story is great, isn't it? The Gospelers are really good authors, don't you think? I mean, they tell a really good story for the most part. They've got great material, yes, but they tell a really good story for the most part. I like Mark in particular because Mark's the shortest Gospel, but it also includes the most detail about stories. Mark starts with, "This is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." And then John the Baptist introduces Jesus, who is baptized. He goes into ministry. The story continues. We have the story of the Transfiguration. Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem and is crucified, and then the resurrection. The empty tomb, the light of the empty tomb is what concludes the story. There's a lot of detail in the stories. That might prompt a lot of questions. Mark's a great gospel for Bible study. Because if you're like me, you have a lot of questions about this story. For example, 6 days. What's the significance of 6 days? Is that significant? If it's not, why didn't he say later? Or sometime later? Or next week? Is there something significant about 6 days? Well, could be. It could be a callback to the creation story, 6 days, right? Could also be the 6 days that Moses waited on the mountain in order to talk to God. Do you remember that story? Maybe not. But first century Jews hearing this story would know it. And it might be significant. Why do you only take those 3 disciples? What about the rest of them? I mean, sure, they were going up a mountain, maybe they were. There's another question. Which mountain are we talking about? Oh, maybe that's another thing about the 6 days. We're supposed to be able to figure out, based on the average amount of time it would take you to walk a certain distance, over 6 days, how far could Jesus have gone from the previous part of the story? And if you think that's too much math for you, people are figuring out how long it will take Taylor Swift to get to the Super Bowl. So I don't think that that's too much math. That could be significant. Generally, biblical scholars think, it's Mount Hermon that they think is the mountain in the Transfiguration story. Is that significant? And what kind of mountain are we talking about? Are we talking about like they hiked up a trail, or did they actually have to climb? In which case, that would have been tricky with the long robes and stuff, I guess. But maybe that's why he only took those 3. Or is there more significance to those 3? Moses and Elijah appear. What's the significance of Moses and Elijah? That's probably a little bit more obvious. The law and the prophets. They symbolize the law and the prophets. Moses and Elijah appear. They're having a conversation with Jesus. The 3 disciples that went with Jesus, they're doing what? Well, they're terrified. But wait. Here's an interesting quirk in the story. You don't hear that until after one of them says what they should do. So obviously he wasn't all that terrified, because he had an idea of something they should do. They should set up 3 tents. So is that a comfort thing? If it's a memorial thing, wouldn't it be more likely they'd move like piles of stones together? You know? Because that actually would have been a really good callback to Jacob, right? Remember that story? Okay. So 3 tents, but why 3 tents? Well, you might remember as they were traveling in the desert in Exodus, the temple where the ark resided was a tent because they were mobile, right? But then when they get to Jerusalem, God lives in the temple. That's why they built the temple. So maybe this isn't to memorialize a moment, but rather a place for something holy to live. Could be. But they don't have too long to think about that, because this cloud appears. What's the significance of the cloud, everyone? God appears in a cloud on the mountain. Remember those stories? God always appears in a cloud on the mountain. And then we hear the voice of God, presumably, saying, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." There's a callback to something we darn well should know, because it's the beginning of this gospel. In the baptism of Jesus story, he comes out of the water, the dove appears, and a voice is heard saying, These interactive sermons are not going to go well if you don't interact with me. Imagine people watching this at home going, that's the baptism story. This is my beloved son. The point is, all of these little bits and pieces of the story that are so important that, by the way, this would make this would be a long one, but a great Bible study because you could really work on these things. The point of all of them is it's about the stories that we already know of our connection to God, of how we connect to God, right? The law and the prophets. The cloud is how God appears and the voice of God on the mountain. 6 days. They're all ways in which we're connecting with God. And then there's the big moment. But that's not the end of the story, is it? I'm going to come back to that, but let me just jump ahead to the end of the story for a second, because this piece of the story references the end of the story. Don't tell anyone until after the resurrection. Why? Don't you think they would have said, why? But Mark leaves it hanging. And by the way, he's not the only one who does, because this story appears in the 3 synoptic gospels. It's in Matthew and Luke as well. But here's the thing about Mark, though, is that the way Mark tells the story, Jesus appears as an adult. He's baptized. He goes into the wilderness. He starts to teach and heal and preach. He's on the rise. He's becoming famous. In fact, he's pretty much at the pinnacle, the height of his popularity when this story happens, when they go up the mountain. And then it's descent into Jerusalem and that last week in the crucifixion and Jesus' death. And then the big light, the resurrection story. In other words, this happens right in the middle of things. And right in the middle of things, what does Jesus do? He shines, is what he does. What's the significance of that shine? Right away, you might be thinking to yourself, Charlton Heston. No, you might be. You might have that image in your mind, because if you ever saw the 10 Commandments, and is there anyone who hasn't seen the 10 Commandments? Don't put your hand up if you haven't. Just go and watch the 10 Commandments. There's a scene when Moses comes down, Charlton Heston, comes down from the mountain having talked to God, and his appearance has changed. Do you remember that moment? His appearance has changed, and he's like shining with an inner light. That's actually how Eugene Peterson translates this piece of the story in the Message version of the Bible. He says that Jesus shines with an inner light. He shines with an inner light. What does that mean? To shine with an inner light. See, I think the point of all of these bits and pieces in the story that remind us of our connection with God, our relationship with God, is the background to Jesus shining with an inner light, which is his true divine and human self. The divine shines through in his humanity. And I think the reason he doesn't want the disciples to say anything until after the resurrection is because the point of Jesus' life and death and resurrection, the point of the Jesus story, is to show us that we are still connected to God. We are still divine and human, created in the image of God from the beginning. That divinity that Jesus shows, that divine spirit, is in all of us, and we can shine too. So how will you shine? If you believe, as I do, that the point of Jesus is to show us what we are capable of, because we too are divine and human, how will you shine? So this is normally the moment at which I would stop and I'd let you think about it, because, of course, the point of the message entirely is to get you to think for yourself and not have somebody stand at the front and tell you what you should think. I'm not going to stop there today. I have more, because I'm going to tell you some ways that you could shine. Nope, I'll say that differently. I'm going to tell you some ways you already are shining. Free community suppers. Free soup and a bun lunches twice a week here in Ponoka. Coats for the cold here in Ponoka. Free dinner and a family movies in Bashaw. In Killiman Daysland, free community suppers. Thrift store. We have a thrift store here in Ponoka too. Events that try and create community. Could be a music thing, could be a play, could be a drama. Think of all of the ways in which we are already trying to engage with the community. In fact, let me say that differently. Think of all of the ways in the past year, since it's annual meeting time, right? Time for annual reports. So when you look at the annual report and you see numbers of meetings and numbers of events and numbers of dollars and cents and things, don't read that. Instead, think about the thing that happened. Think about what it might have meant to people, having a free supper, or being able to come to a concert here and not have to travel somewhere to it, or a free movie. Think of the families that would have to spend like $100 to go to a movie somewhere, and they could come here for free and see that same movie. And maybe not just because they couldn't afford it, but because it was here. And they were together with people in their community. Same thing's true of community suppers, isn't it? I mean, you put on a free supper, there will be people at that supper who desperately need food because they live on the street. But there might also be people at that supper who have a home and can afford food, but they're lonely. They miss people. They just want to get out and go somewhere. The point is, we don't know any of that. All we know is what we're able to offer. And so we put these things on. That's not the shine yet. That's just the things. Because here's the thing, right? Jesus shines with an inner light. The point of Jesus and all of that teaching and all of the love and compassion, empathy, grace, all of that stuff is that we live it. It's not behavior, it's who we are. And it can be because the divine spirit and humanity that is in everyone can shine through. It's about us. So if somebody comes to a free dinner and we judge them as to whether or not they should actually be having that dinner for free, your light isn't shining, is it? If we have as both Bashaw and Ponoka do, if we have a pay what you think it's worth yard sale, and then we tell people what they should give us for the things that they want to take away, where's the light? The point is, they are the ones who know. We are the ones who offer freely. And if we don't offer freely, it isn't free, is it? And that's the thing when we talk about Jesus' love being unconditional, the love of God being unconditional. That love isn't waiting for payback. That love isn't waiting for something in return. That's the shine. You can do all of the acts of kindness and goodness and everything in the world you want to. But if it's not happening because the love of God is in you and being shared with others, it's not the shine, is it? And that's what Jesus is after. That's what Jesus demonstrates in this story. The inner light that is in us. There's an awesome, and you'll have seen this, of course, because I know everyone spends a lot of time on the internet. There's a meme, a little cartoon going around that's been going around. It's old. But it's somebody who has come to the pearly gates, and Peter's there, and he's got the book out, and he's looking in the book, and he's going, Yeah, you did lots of really good things, but you missed the whole don't be a jerk about it part. He missed the light. We can do all of the acts of kindness we want. We can do all of the behaviors we want. But if that behavior isn't because we are living what is true to us, the divine image of God that is in us, that's the light. That's the shine. That's the point of this story, I think. It isn't just to reveal, here's Jesus, because we've had that a bunch of times. In fact, Mark's gospel begins with it. This is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Here's John the Baptist. Here's Jesus. Right off the bat. This is my beloved Son. Very first story. We've had it before. There's a reminder in this story that you've heard it before. What you haven't heard before is, here's the shine. This is what it's about. And that light is for you, too. That's why we need the whole rest of the story. That's why the disciples weren't supposed to say anything until after the resurrection. We need the whole story. We, too, can shine when we live the love that is in us into the world. And we don't think about whether or not we're getting something back. We don't think about whether somebody has earned it. We don't judge their behavior. We support them in being who they are. We don't tell them who they should be. We don't make them conform to what we think is right. We help them to find their way to what they know in their hearts is right. That's the shine. So I'm going to ask the question again for you to think about. How will you shine?